Well, I'm Michael McCarthy, Michael Francis McCarthy. I'm a musician and farm laborer.
All right. Well, Michael, thank you so much for sitting down with me and chatting for a bit. You and I are friends in real life, and so I'm just happy to have this opportunity to sit down and talk about your life and what the normal day is like in a traveling, working songwriter and member of the working class. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today, brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, hosted by Maximilian Alvarez and produced by Jules Taylor. I am the Working People producer, Jules Taylor, here today, bringing you an exciting and fun interview with my good friend, Michael Francis McCarthy. I'm really excited to sit down and talk with you. And this interview kind of hits close to home because, as the listeners probably know about me, like I'm a musician and a songwriter. And, I at points in my life, I have derived more of my income from that than at other times. But before we get into talking about what a typical day in your life is as a songwriter, I want to, in a Working People tradition, go back to your early childhood and ask you about where you were born and where you grew up.
Okay. Well, I was born in Bogota, Colombia. My dad had a job working on water systems in a rural area of Colombia through Catholic Relief Services. My folks met each other in the Peace Corps in Central America, and then they traveled in Latin America for work for a number of years. So I was born in Bogota, Colombia, in a hospital that still is there today called La Clínica Country. And then I grew up partially there and in Bolivia until I was like 3, and then came back to the States.
That's really wild, man. So like, did you, you were born with like American citizenship, but you were born in Colombia, which is really wild. I don't know that many Americans have the experiencing of, one, like obviously living overseas, but two, with that specific part of the world,
Yeah, definitely. I get questions from border officials like, "Oh, Colombia, huh? How did that happen?" or whatever. But, it was an experience. I grew up speaking English and Spanish and forgot most, but not all, of my Spanish after we came back to the States. But like, I still would say I'm really culturally Pan-American.
So I know that you have some family in New Hampshire. Is that like when you guys came back to the States, did you go back in New Hampshire? Is there a particular tie to that region that your family has?
It was end up being for work for my dad. We briefly, when we came back, stayed with family, and all my dad's family is from the city, from New York City. So we stayed with family in the city briefly. And then we lived for about 6 months in St. Albans, Vermont. That's like northern Vermont, way up north near the Canada border almost. Maybe about an hour from the Canada border or something like that, in that region of Vermont, I think on the eastern side of the state. But we were there for 6 months. My dad worked construction, looking for something a little more substantive, and he ended up getting another job in water resource management out of northern Massachusetts. So where we were was just on the Mass border. So, I'm from southwestern New Hampshire, which is really verges culturally into northern Mass culture. So like my dad was working in northern Mass, but New Hampshire's just a little bit quieter and a little bit more affordable. It was 20 minutes away from his job. So we lived just over the border. My mom went to school in New Hampshire. She went to UNH back in the 70s. And so I think she always kind of liked it. I think there were a couple things that came together, but the big thing was, my dad was managing a water resource program out of Winchendon, Mass, which is like just over the New Hampshire.
And like water resource management, is that like in the vein of like environmental conservation stuff, or like more just like municipal water work kind of stuff?
My folks come from an international development background. And my dad his position in the Peace Corps was working, I think, he came into the Peace Corps with a couple of different skill sets. He had some language skills and he had construction skills. And he thought his language skills were going to be what got the job. But when he applied, because all of my dad's family is DOT, Department of Transportation, New York Department of Transportation. My dad worked for him. All of his brothers worked. My grandfather, his brother, my great uncle, my cousin works for him. So my aunt works for him. A family of DOT people.
So you have a line in one of your songs, I know, and I'm my spidey senses are tingling because you mentioned ain't nothing like a smile from a toll booth operator, and so I guess that's kind of where that goes back to, is from your dad and your family being DOT.
A little bit. That one's actually pretty personal. That's my own personal life of like coming back late to gigs and running into I always felt like the only person in town really knew how hard I was at working out there was the toll booth like that. Because she would see me on my way either out or in, sometimes both. And sometimes she'd see me 3 nights in a row, coming back at 2 a.m. from the gig. And there'd be times too, she'd see me leave, come back at 2 a.m. from the gig, go back out for a labor gig at 7 in the morning, 7:30, other
right.
mornings. So she got a picture of my life. Anyway, I could rant about that. But yeah, it's funny. We touch on so much here. I started talking DOT and I forgot what the heck you asked me about, Jules.
Oh no, I just I had an uncle or something growing up that wasn't in like water resource management, but he was more like the guy that worked overnight for like the municipal water stuff. So like I wanted to find out that distinction. You mentioned your family was like in international development.
Yeah, I lost the thread. So my dad came from DOT and construction. So when he applied to Peace Corps, they put him on working with the actual physical water system in rural places that had, we'll say, a small amount of money allotted through the government or derived through non-governmental organizations, NGOs, or programs like Peace Corps, money coming from the UN, whatever. And this would be a certain amount of money that could, if spent properly, could make X number of drinking water systems for X number of villages. And my dad would go and be involved in some of the physical building and meeting with contractors and that sort of thing. But as he went on in his career, he kept being involved in those sort of projects. But it would be like, that was in 1979, he started doing that work, 79 to 81 in rural Guatemala. But you fast forward to when he got the job in Massachusetts in 1988, he was in charge of working with communities in Massachusetts and also in Puerto Rico. They hired him because he had the dual language thing, English and Spanish, and they needed somebody to fly out to Puerto Rico. But by that time, I don't think my dad was turning many wrenches. I think mostly he was dealing with trying to figure out how state and federal money moves around and how to get grants for community projects.
That's really interesting, man.
So roughly speaking, he did like nonprofit program development was his career track for most of his career. And my mom was a public school teacher. So,
being born in Colombia, spending some time in Bolivia, and then coming back to the States. I mean, it sounds like your very early childhood was, it was in different parts of the world, right? But was there like a solid, like, was New Hampshire that solid place for you where you grew up in the States and had like a childhood there?
It's funny that you say that, Jules, because in a sense, it's like I've always in the ensemble, and maybe I invent this a memory now, but it always has sort of felt like I'm aware of the fact that I have arrived at a continent that is not the first one that I originally came. I've been vaguely aware from the age of 3 that I'm in the new place now, and I'm 37, but still somehow 34 years later, I feel like I'm doing a good job being here in this new place. There's a little bit of that feeling. But then the first home I sort of really knew, like, because we would make visits back to the States or whatever. So the first home I really knew again was New York City. That's where all my uncles and aunts from Bayside, Queens. Working class Irish and Italian area of Queens. And it was working class then. It isn't really now, or at least by prices, it's not now. People can afford it now, are a different class of people than people who lived there in the 1950s, the 80s. Bayside of the mid to late 80s is was the first United States I knew. So in some sense, that predates it all, because through some of our early overseas years, some of the time in Vermont and everything, New York was the constant. But yeah, from age 4 onward, New Hampshire was. But it's funny, like it felt so permanent at the time, but I look back and it was actually only like ages 4 to 18. So 14 years, which I've learned is just blink of an eye. I remember 23. I'm 27. The point is that time goes quick. So 14 years of New Hampshire was enough for me to feel like something.
Well, I mean, it's just kind of wild, and learning this stuff about you is I know that some people living upstate, where in the area where you and I live, like some people like were born and grew up around New York City and just go back and forth between upstate and there just fluidly, and they're fine with it. Other people like me who relocated to upstate New York from other parts of the country, I don't go to the city unless you have a gun to my head kind of thing, and so, but you've I knew you had ties in New Hampshire, but I know that you're very comfortable in New York City, and I knew you'd spent some time there. So learning about how all of this kind of took shape in your life, as part of part of the pleasure that I have as your friend, and even having a chance to interview you. So I think all that is really cool. So what age did you start playing guitar? You seem like you picked that up pretty early.
My folks put a guitar in my hands when I was 4. I started lessons with so in rural New Hampshire, I grew up in a town called Jaffrey, and near Jaffrey, there's an even littler town called Dublin. So like Jaffrey's maybe 5,000 people, but in Dublin, that's maybe like 2,000. And there's an Italian restaurant and trattoria where the husband is the chef, and his wife for many years ran the music store and taught music lessons out of the store, and also did hostess work at the Italian restaurant downstairs. A really amazing old style business. And they were really interesting people. They basically loved food and bluegrass, made it their life's business to have this space always there. And it's funny, it was one of those things that you grow up with that you're like, oh yeah. Like I grew up in a town with Mount Monadnock, which is a beloved mountain that is one of the most high mountains in the world. But both of those are examples of things where it's like, you grow up with it and it's normal. And you leave and you look back and you're like, I can't believe that was there. But anyway, so this woman, her name was Elena Del Rossi, taught me from the ages of 4 to the age of 8. She started with and I still recommend this to new learners, the Hal Leonard guitar method. You come in and you start with classic songs. I think among the first 10 songs, you learn like Ode to Joy, Green Sleeves, Blues in the Key of G, Amazing Grace, Danny Boy, Eleanor Rigby. I was able to name 6 out of those that were in the book, but those were ones that, they lay it all out for you. But she just made it very fun. She gave me bite-sized chunks. It was, I was as a displaced, New York-derived person. I was not of New Hampshire. People were not of New Hampshire, but Elena Del Rossi was deeply of New Hampshire, is still deeply of New Hampshire. Somebody who has a thick New Hampshire accent that lands right between the ka of Massachusetts and the yacht of Maine. It lands right in the middle, New Hampshire deep. She had that then. So she would just patiently teach me the building blocks of a musical life. So, you start with the C chord and the melodies, easily pick around it, just slowly expand out from there. Nylon string guitar. So
when you say that your parents put a guitar in your hand, was that like not an original? Did you express an interest in guitar, which is why they did that, or was this just like a family thing that they were just doing because that's what they did?
Love for music was a family thing, but no musicians really in the family, and neither of my parents had played. I didn't expressly ask for guitar, but what I did do was like jump around a lot in the living room when my dad played Led Zeppelin and certain other things. And I think I whistled a lot. And also, like, I was born with born nearsighted, and I had an eye injury on my 4th birthday. I was hit in the eye with a bullet, and both of those things like made it so that my eyes weren't like I could enjoy it. Like it's not like I could never be a visual artist, but it made me more inclined, I think, towards auditory. So maybe so in other words, they could have suggested painting, but it might have been more about puzzle. But just I always had fun with music, and they saw that. And then this teacher was there. I think that part of the opportunity thing, like they could tell me themselves, but geez, right here, just down the road with this warm room with a patient and encouraging educator who made it possible. So it was privilege, you know what I mean?
Totally. So you got now that you mentioned it, man, you got to tell me a little more about this fork in the eye thing that happened on your 4th birthday, man.
You will get
and I don't mean to laugh. It's like I'm imagining the anxieties of every listener that's a parent. Just fork in the eye, 4th birthday. Can you like set the scene on how that happened?
What's crazy is like you'd like to think that like there's a whole big story behind it, but that's the crazy thing. And I'm a parent now.
Yeah.
And I'm responsible for watching over my kid and making sure things don't go haywire. And they can in a short amount of time. So I think what happened was my 4th birthday. Me and my cousin were there. There was a Cookie Monster cake with googly eyes. She wanted those googly eyes. And clearly, those were not her fucking eyes. My birthday. And I wouldn't give them up. And we were eating. My grandfather built this house in Bayside, Queens with his own hands. And it had a porch on the side. It looked out onto the back yard where there was 2 big trees, and also onto Nicky Lutsky's next door and the grapevines he had behind his house. And it was a screened-in porch, and me and my cousin were out there, and we were eating this cake, and I got a bunch of it on my glasses, and my mom agreed to go wash the glasses for me. So my, taking the shield away, I went to go wash my glasses. While she was doing that, some verbal altercation ensued between me and my 4-year-old cousin vis-a-vis the googly eyes, if you can believe that. And so in the conflict that followed, I'll own this. I threw a spoon, and I didn't hit her with the spoon, but I threw it, and it landed on, as I remember, it landed on the ground. In fact, I think I threw my spoon in anger or frustration, but not like as a projectile. And I threw my spoon, and then she threw her fork. And just the way the universe works, kids ought to have plastic cake forks. I know. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't give my daughter, I wouldn't put my daughter unsupervised in a room with another child and give her a metal cake. But that's just me. And I think I would do that anyway. But it's just the way of the universe. And everybody's got a wham. That was but anyway, that's the story. It hit me in the eye. It wasn't like an impalement, but what happened is it like bounced off of the lens and created the clouding in the cornea. But through some, I don't know if it was quite a medical miracle, but certainly good luck. There's a small pinhole opening in that clouding of the cornea, through which I'm able to see, but there was distortion on the lens. So, in 1988, they cut the lens off my eye, and it's the same lens that would be the one that would make it so that when you look at a black light, you just see a purple light. You don't see a bright pink light that shines out light like a regular light bulb, right?
Right.
Well, through my left eye, I do.
Wow.
That lens is crazy. Anyway.
Wow.
So yeah, now I have corrected vision, and to have a fully resolved vision, I need augmentation of like a different prescription, basically, in my left eye.
Wow.
So yeah.
Well, that's quite a story. You're working people. We tend to go back and ask people about their childhood and the stories that happened in their early years, and that's something I never knew about you, and it's something that it goes towards. I think we all have like a story where we're all at some point like injured during our childhood from some, and it's always in that moment when like the parent walks away, briefly, it sucks for parents out there who are listeners. I apologize for the shooting senses of anxieties around all of that that are once again revisited. I'm sure that being a parent is just probably just, I'm not a parent, but I feel like it's probably anxiety all the time. But Michael, as I'm talking to you here, you're sitting in a camper. You, for listeners visually, Michael has a pair of glasses on and a big burly beard. And you know, it's funny, man. It's like, it's kind of like when I first met you, the day that I met you, you were playing a set in Woodstock at a place called the Walk and Roll. And you were wearing overalls and you had a pair of boots on. And I felt like you had just come. I mean, it looked like you were like a laborer on a farm or something, like you had just come from the farm or something to that end. And so, right. Yeah. And so that's when I met Michael, and I heard his music. And I mean, he only played a couple songs. You played what, like 2 or 3 at that point. And immediately I went to the stage to go try and meet you, because I was like, yo, this guy's really cool. I should introduce myself, become his friend, that sort of thing. And our friendship, we grew close. We spent some time together. But one of the things I found remarkable in this sort of pivot over to what it's like being a songwriter, I had no idea how you were able to schedule the amount of gigs that you did at one point, or that you do. And what I mean by that is that, you get to know the musicians in your area, and you have a feel for what the scene is like, and what the people around you are doing. And there are people that you follow online on social media, and they usually have they post a picture of their tour dates, or if they have enough to call it a tour. And if you're lucky, you get to do this every now and then with a big, list of dates. And that's just, but what I noticed with you was that, I mean, your dates were just congested, thick, and extensive, dude. It was like you had dates far beyond, like it wasn't even close to, I mean, there might have been 1 or 2 other musicians in the Hudson Valley scene where we both live that had that sort of density in their schedule. It was remarkable, dude. And at one point, you as a friend, you gave me a spreadsheet of just it was basically like venue, who to contact, phone numbers, like what they, compensation they offered, what nights of the week they were offering music,
schedule, how to, and then
and then you were like, Jules, let me take a look at your booking email. What are you sending people, and what does your website look like? And so you helped me in a lot of those regards when we met, and you helped bring a lot of these, for a working musician that's going to take this on as their main and primary sort of way of being. You help cement a lot of basically rules of the game in a lot of ways. So I'm wondering if maybe now that I've kind of set this scene, I'm wondering if you could tell us about, I don't know, like your career in gigging. I know you lived in Austin, Texas for a bit, and I'm sure there's plenty of gigs there. But what is all that life like? Because a lot of listeners out there, I mean, I think you and I are unique in that, we got a guitar and a song and we try and make a go of it. And some of us are more successful than others. But I mean, I've always been just astounded by the things that you're doing and the things you continue to do, brother.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jules, for that praise. And thanks for noticing. It was honestly really gratifying to get to share with you on a friend level and be like, here's someone that, who I can talk shop with. And I feel like, I could trust on a personal level to kind of share my process a little bit. Part of it is I just wanted to share with somebody else because of the time I put into it. But to bring it back a little bit, when I went to college, I went to a decent college. I came out with some debt, and I had opportunities and things I could do other than music, some obligations sort of socially to do so. And certainly, in the ipso facto logic of school debt, there's this idea. If it wasn't obvious, go attack your school debt with gigs. That actually would have been a decent idea looking back. Because the thing is, the messaging that you get, okay, as a musician going out there, and I'm talking from the very beginning, the messaging that you get is, well, you can't really make a living as a musician these days, but I mean, it's nice to do what you love, but in the end, you got to really think about, your future. That is the message you will get from people who mean well, people who love you, people who buy you guitars, people who tell you they love music, people who themselves cry at meaningful songs, who have certain favorite songs they listen to when they're having hard days or when they're getting married or after a loved one dies. People who cherish certain music close to themselves would tell a young music dreamer going to them for some sort of something, hey, well, music is a good hobby to have that doesn't really make. And they mean well, but that is the message that you get all the time. And eventually, someday it happens that you meet somebody who goes, oh, yeah, it's all bullshit. You'd be like, what? They'd be like, oh, no, like that thing about how you can't make money. And that's the thing that people who don't know talk about say, because they don't do it. Do they? And then they ask you, that person who said you can't, are they a player? No. Or did they used to be one? Like, well, no, they're an accountant. Something big. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I play music, but I'll tell you, it's possible. You know what I mean? So it's like, you have to, growing up, I had to always kind of believe in the impossible. So I'm going to try to not range too big on my response here. But I will say at the beginning, one of the things is like, you kind of can't really take on playing music for a living unless you like a long shot. But also you have to like the process. So what beats a lot of other people down and makes them quit the game by the age of 30, often, right around that cutoff time, is that the process they don't like. So they don't like heavy driving. They don't like anonymous gigs. They don't like winning over an apathetic crowd. They don't like figuring out what is the common ground between songs they are willing to play that they love, that the audience also is going to get down. You know what I mean? And that means I either have to write my own material to be accommodating to popular taste, or I have to play covers that I'm not too cool to play, and play venues where I'm okay with playing songs written by other people, unless or until I can write songs that the audience wants to hear more. And so, there's a lot of things that you need, basically, if you want to make what I call like industrial, regional, anonymous gig work economically. And when I say industrial, regional, and anonymous, so I mean each of those words. Industrial in the sense that you need to accept that you're going to drive 50,000 miles. If you want to scratch a living, because the kind of gigs I play like are cash guarantee gigs. Now I do play some ticket gigs. I play some, venues where people are paying ahead of time or at the door with a specific experience going in and seeing. A lot of my bread and butter, to sustain what I do, comes from cash guarantee gigs where I'm being paid for the sounds I make and the general presence that I bring into the room when the place hires me. It's not like they're paying me to be an alcohol drinker. I'm not responsible for bringing drinkers to them or eaters to them. That's their job. They fill the room. That's my mindset. You give me the room, and I'll bring the sound system that makes it sound. Now, there's a limit. There's a ceiling to what you can make in that game. I think the people who are getting the best cash guarantee gigs around upstate New York, probably, if they're working for rich folk, they could probably get $500 guarantees. Mostly, it's south of it. And there's a food chain. So, like, there are people who will, God bless them, and I used to be part of the food chain, the overall gigging economy, who will go out and dead ass, they will drive an hour to go play for 2 hours for $50. I've been there. And when I was in that place, I was paying some heavy dues, but that was also before I had a kid. You know what I mean? And that was at a time when I would have been working at a call center during the day to make money. I'm going back now to Florida, right? I'm imagining myself having a kid, back, a little 8-9 years ago. At that time, I had like a call center job. I hadn't yet gone full time with gigging until my late 20s. So like through my, I did other stuff. I was a cook. I did construction labor. I did carpentry labor. I did teaching. I did a range of different roles. But importantly, along the way, I held jobs that sucked in different ways, but that gave me skills that were important. One of the most important ones, like, short out of school with debt stacked up and no sense of how to be cool, how to go get gigs. I didn't know. I would write a big, long, breathless booking email to one venue and never hear back. I'd be like, dude, I guess I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't yet understand that the person who got my email would also receive 100 others that day. They would be irritating in a million ways. The winner would be the person who sent the least irritating email. I didn't get that yet. So, you know what I mean? Like when you're young, dumb, and full of plums, you got all this energy and you're ready to burn it. You end up putting a lot of it into the bottle. So, like, I didn't go crazy with it. I drank my share enough that I'm now not sober. But like, you have other distractions, and you also don't need it as much. So there's all these ways, basically, that earlier on, like, I wasn't in a super gigging way, because I'd be like, oh, well, I'll use my college degree to, like, go get this sales job, or to go get this, this job or that job, or I'll use my back to just go do some landscape and do things other than getting paid to play. Okay? So it's weird how, like, anyway, so I spent all this time there, but somewhere along my journey, okay, in Florida, I met a class of players who, they don't do other things for a living. And I didn't know people like this up north. All the musicians I ever knew growing up were either factory town like me, or they might have been in the big city, which is where all us factory town kids thought we were going to make it. Your Bostons, your Philadelphias, your New Yorks. Then we would show up to those places and get jobs as graphic designers or baristas, and we would get embittered by the long hours spent working for somebody else doing dummy work during the week in an office chair with our backs hurting, getting kind of fat and drinking. We're getting embittered by that. And you'd be in a scene like I was in Boston, like 10 years ago at this time, or a little more than a decade ago, I was playing in a metal band in Boston. It was exactly that life. I worked sales during the week, didn't like it. But boy, I learned about selling. I learned about writing a business email. I learned about making a spreadsheet to track all your clients. I learned about the grind of sitting down and going, oh, I hate computers, but I'm going to use a template to have a very well thought out message that I sent industrial to hundreds of venues, and find through the numbers game and inevitability of the fact that people want American music entertainment and like to say yes to have the problem solved. If I send enough emails, I make that happen. But the sales job pounded that into me, but it was a year and a half of misery. I'm 173 pounds now, but I was like 200 pounds of fear and sorrow in urban Boston, wearing like inexpensive dress clothes that are uncomfortable in a way that anybody who's ever had them knows what I mean. An early sales job like that, you have you're trying to look good, but your shit's cheap. Those are hard days. But one of the hard things about it was that, I had this band that I cared about so much, and me and my best friend, we were in this band and running this band. We cared, put so much energy into our rehearsals every week and everything. You'd be like, oh, you'll saturate the market, was the idea. If you're in a band that plays ticketed venues, you'll saturate the Boston market. Venues would even specify in their contracts, we will only book you if you don't have another show. There's a proximity clause. You can't have a show within 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks in a 1 hour radius. So it would be like that, like all the big venues. If you booked a big venue in February, that's your only gig, February, or else you piss off the venue. So it would be like that. And so that early experience of working a sales job while doing ticketed only venues playing metal, it's a very hard to make money at. So anyway, all of that was hard lesson, Well, and that was my Northeastern, let's give it a go when I'm young era of music. And then a little later in my 20s, when I was doing some traveling and spending time in Florida, I found a number of things. I found that the cost of living was lower in Florida, and the weather was more permissive to outdoor hanging. Plus, there's two coasts packed with cities of people who need entertainment all the time. So in that time, I met a class of players around my age who could speak to me in the common dude language I could understand and put into layman's terms the nuts and bolts, the pieces parts of how a working musician life is, or even just to observe other players. And that could mean like observing, like, what does it look like if somebody pays all their bills playing? Get to know somebody. You see, okay, there are the road dogs who are like just out all the time. They keep their bills paid. They have lots of babysitters, or their wife or husband watches kids all the time. They're just out and they pay like that. But then there are also the players who would stay local. And the players who would stay local were almost always more oriented towards cover music. But there's this funny thing in the South where when you're playing covers, if that's blues and country, it isn't, the identity isn't so much that you're a cover band guy. It's more like more socially accepted, I think, in the South, the cultural idea of let's cook a big batch of food, let's everybody hang out, and let's play and sing the songs of the day. And sing folk songs. I don't know, I just found culturally in the South, this like celebratory music culture. And by the way, cut me off whenever you want, because I can just keep going and going here, but I just want to give you the best I can. Like, I encountered basically in the South a players culture of people who are working class players that all they do is play gigs. Now, some of them have side hustles here and there, especially a lot of them would sell drugs because it just went with the life. But really, for the first time in my life, I found myself among people who would go out and play 4 nights. And that was all that was acceptable to them, because to them, if they didn't do that and they had to start work construction, they had to start to teach, they had to start work in the coffee shop, things like that. Not to put those things down, but anybody who's done that hard life of, you know, making 14 tax dollars an hour doing customer service, like, that shit's hard. Like, being a musician is the good life. Like, even if I only clear that same $14, but I work for myself, I travel around, I play music with my friends, like, it's at the best, it can be the best. But what that means is you got to go out there and gigs. So like, you being impressed with numbers I was doing, basically what it comes from, sales job trained me in how to industrially contact, in how to send a minimalist email that thinks from the perspective of an impatient booking about what they want to hear and what they don't. Give them what they need. So all they need to do is say yes or no to a specific set of dates that you give them that you know other people aren't booked already. And you do as much as you can. So like, there's that, and just sending it out and tracking. What I found is, if a certain number of people are going to like me, and a certain number of people, so the more I put out in effort, the more booking up. That's limiting factor. Limiting factor number 2 is the driving and the physical halt of it. That's the next thing. Like, if you can hit, if some people can or can't do the email thing, that's one. But another thing is, can't you, like, handle 50,000 miles a year of driving out of the Northeast and all the things that it entails? Drivers, the stress on the road, looking for somewhere to be, the easy pass fines, the deer running out of the road, parking tickets, the tires that break, the replace dignities, mining, parkers, send fuck, all these things, you know what I mean? It adds up to a lot. And I think that some people will sustain that for a time, but at a certain point it stops being worth it. So it's like, I had to find some zen love on the road. Like, in other words, the most painful parts of the road had to be part of the story for me that I embraced. Because otherwise it just beats down. You can't get away from the back pain. Slouch into it.
Yeah, I mean,
you can jump in here wherever you need.
No. This is all wonderful stuff. I mean, and this is part of like what I hope to get out of this conversation, because I've had the pleasure of being your friend, but also like I have observed you go through these things, and and I think that, like, I mean, in so many words, like everything you just said, I mean, you were the person in my life that sort of nailed all of that down for me. Like, look, man, there's the driving and there's the markets, and you look at this like a salesperson. Like, before I had met you, I spent 5 or 6 years working for a company up here upstate called Marketech, and at one point I had sold like $500,000 worth of broadcast equipment during a year, and it was a good salaried job, but it was like, it's also like I had 500 accounts, and so like the
were those accounts that you had, did you make those accounts?
Well, they, when they brought me in for sales, I was like, yo, just give me all the music accounts. I'm a musician. I know all the people at Sam Ash. And so they gave me the Sweetwaters and all those kind of accounts, So I was happy to have those. And that's how I got that's how I developed the avenue that allowed me to go from marketer tech into Guitar Center Professional for a bit. But all that being said, it's like, I think you were definitely the person that framed like, hey, numbnuts, dude, you got the sales know-how. Why aren't you, transferring that, experience and knowledge onto the songwriter, performer sort of, aspects to it. And so when I saw your spreadsheet that you had sent over at one point, and I saw, all of the various activities you were engaged in, that was a big, sort of shot in the arm, and also a kind of slap in the face in a way of like, hey, what have I been doing, and why aren't I doing this now? And so it was something that when I saw, because your spreadsheet was also, it wasn't just like, hey, here's Massachusetts and upstate New York and a bunch of information I already knew. It was like, here's Florida, here's like North Carolina, I think was in there, Pennsylvania. It was a huge spreadsheet. And I've seen big spreadsheets and sales sheets that come across, in a sales job. And that was a very large spreadsheet. And it seemed like it was something you worked on over the course of years. And it also and part of the reason why and part of the reason why I was enthralled by this concept was because you had also come out of a soul crushing cubicle sales job at one point. And so your story, I don't know if you, would you tell me about you got the van and you quit the next day. Is that kind of how things went down in that soul crushing cubicle job you had?
No, not exactly. You're actually combining stories. I bought the van and quit the next day. I had a job working for the state of New York, more recently, actually working for the migrant education program, which was basically, I was doing bilingual tutoring of algebra 1 and algebra 2, to students who were taking standardized tests in high school. The pay was $16.25 an hour. I used my own vehicle. It was just a brutal job. I used to drive. But I started getting to know that Sullivan County a little bit. But I used to drive more than an hour each way to work, and it was nuts. It was quite a job. It was awesome. That was my last. I think my last non-job. I do farming now, and I love it. But I consider farming like a vocation. I don't know if I'll ever again do like a job. But to bring it back, you want me to tell you about work sales? What that's called?
I'm a little more interested in you had mentioned something earlier about how some people were uncomfortable with so they expect covers, and until such a time I can write songs that audiences want to hear, then I have to play covers. But it brought up this sort of, in the duality of hey, I'm a salesperson that applied all that towards songwriting and performing, right? There's also this this rub between what you're passionate about and what there's a market demand for. And so I wonder in terms of because I know your musical preferences, you've told me you love the Allman Brothers and things like the band, I think, and this sort of Southern classical sort of Southern rock kind of vibe. And I wonder because in upstate New York, that kind of, they love that shit up here, I play country music and they love that shit. And I bring that up to say that in your own musical preferences and the own kind of music that you perform that audiences receive well, was that always aligned with the market and monetizing your passion, or was it something that you kind of chose out deliberately?
Early on, as a musician, right out of college, a friend started this metal band I referred to. And we decided to move down to Florida for a bunch of reasons in 2007. That was my first taste down there for a year, then came up north and played for another 2 years. So basically 3 years in a metal band. Now we were doing a mix of kind of jam music a la Allman Brothers, the band, the Dead, that vibe. A mix of that with metal, which means we were doing a niche within a niche. Suffice it to say, that was not really like that was, I think maybe at another point, if we had done just the jammy vibe, and if we had realized that there was all this like working class gay money out there for working bands, I might have done that when I was 20. But for some reason, I went on this circuitous journey and did all this other stuff. And it wasn't until I was like 28, 29 that I first realized, hey, wait, I don't have to do other things for a living. I can play blues and country music in the South, on the coast, and love my life. And that's how I started to do it, too, because like talking about like covers versus non-covers. I mean, the very tip of the iceberg is wagon, right? I like to use this as a wedge issue, okay? People love to love it. People love to hate it, especially when Darius Ruckers. Wagon Wheel is what I think Wagon Wheel is to American roots music, okay? What Sam Adams is to craft beer.
Right.
Now,
right.
The only way in which maybe that's, well, I guess it still is true because Dylan wrote a long time. But let's say a person has a very suburban existence with very little connection to like rootsy, old-timey rurality, right? And a lot of their time on the freeway, strip malls, and pavement in their car. And they turn on the radio, maybe just for a minute on a summer night when they turn on the radio, they hear Rock Me Mama Like a Wagon Wheel. And it evokes something deep in them that they may not even feel they have a legitimate claim on, but it might give them a lump in their throat to think, this is my America. This is my America. This is a place to be from. There is a fabric, a culture fabric here. It belongs to me, belongs to my side, and the other one that I yell at during election time. It's everybody. This is America. It's ours. There's something really meaningful there. And so, like, when people, some people would get that feeling with Sweet Home Alabama. There are a lot of songs that in hipster-ish culture, we like to turn our nose up. I say we're all part of this thing, right? Modern culture, but like the nose may be turned up at things like Wagon Wheel. I've been super Wagon Wheel. I ask for a $20 minimum tip to play Wagon Wheel at my gigs, and people play it, and then I'll play it. And they get it. If they and they aren't offended, hey, it's $20. I've played it. Okay? And I'm not too cool for that school. But I've got some good songs that I can play. Well, why do I bring up Wagon Wheel? The point is, like, American Roots sells everywhere, even not in America. I have not yet encountered a place in this world, and I have done this, okay? I've been paid to play music in Guatemala. I did it for a year and a half. I have been paid to play, and I played 4 nights a week in Guate. That was actually where my heavy gigging started. We can get into that. But because before that, I was a rock player who played occasional gigs. Guate was where I started doing gigging all the time. Did that for a year and a half. When I came back, I realized that was still possible. But basically, the roots music sells everywhere. It sells in the north, it sells in the south. It sells in the country because people feel country in the country. It sells in the city because people want to feel country in the city. It sells, southern music sells in the north because people in the north are not southern, and they want to feel southern. People, southern music sells in the south because people are southern. They're like, fuck yeah, we're southern. Let's celebrate that shit.
Yeah, man. Now, one thing I did want to ask you about, though, man, is that it's really difficult in my own experience, and I'm sure you can talk a lot about this. But like I write stuff that I think is in like the country music sort of vein. I mean, that's always where I've classified it, and that's where how people tend to think of it. And I mean, I consider you in the same vein, right? And so, like, in making this sort of traditional style of Southern music or country music or Southern rock or what have you, it's really difficult to hold the left-wing politics that you and I have with some of these audiences. And I say this because it's like, I mean, it's even hard to be a fan of this style of music when you have, certain like, and I'm not talking about like the Toby Keith style of like country music. I mean, I'm talking about like, I mean, even someone like Charlie fucking Daniels, who played bass on the Nashville Skyline album for Dylan. And it's like, it's abhorrent. It's like, oh my God, you know, I mean, so like, and so like, when I say some of the audiences, I mean that like, you know, like even, I don't know if I told you this about, in Ulster County, in the county where we live, there was a time when the Ulster County Fair, booked, they booked a band for listeners out there. They booked a band called Confederate Railroad, and this band's been around forever. And I mean, none of the locals were having it. At least none of the leftist politics inclined left population here was not having it, right? And so, but during this time, I was talking with another band about playing with them, and they were called Whiskey Crossing, and so I was talking to Whiskey Crossing. They were going to play at the Chance. Now, for a number of reasons, which I'll just briefly say that the Chance does not, I mean, I don't like the Chance. I've never liked the Chance, but the Chance is one of those stages in this area where it's like, if you're going to play all the big stages, you might as well go and play the Chance. And, but the Chance, like, they don't treat their artists well. They do this like kind of thing where they expect you to sell so many tickets. And then what we've seen time and time again is what they do as a venue. They end up, canceling your gig after you sell a bunch of tickets, and they push the date further out to make you sell more tickets. Yeah, it's a whole racket down there, right? But what got me though was that, like, you know, I was trying to play the Chance with underneath this other band, and I was hoping I could sneak into that bill and just sort of avoid that entire process, right?
Whiskey Crossing, Dharma.
Yeah, and but then the Chance, once this Confederate Railroad thing blew up with the fair, the fair canceled Confederate Railroad, and then the Chance booked them. And here I was kind of on their roster of artists for a future country show. And I sent them an email afterwards, like, don't you dare include me in on any of this stuff. Don't mention my name on any of your shit. Like, I am not going to play your venue if y'all are just going to like come into this very controversial moment and try to seize on this and then book this band in a town like Poughkeepsie, New York. You know, so it was a situation where I felt really, I was offended and angry about the entire thing. But I say all this to sort of illustrate just one of many examples of how it's difficult to sort of thread this needle of making this type of music for you. I mean, this is a lot of the people who listen to you or your potential listeners are not people that carry the same politics as you and me.
Definitely. And it's funny. I found that like during the pandemic, I started, a lot of people, I think, putting more effort into my online presence. And it became more clear to me that I needed to compartmentalize, or just come to terms with the fact that there would be limits or consequences, basically, if I didn't compartmentalize my political expression and my online promotional presence. I think my politics come through in my music. I think any good writing shouldn't hit you over the head, show instead of tell. And I think you should tell in a way that it's taste. I think that's always true. So I think that's true. Like, look, I love Rage Against the Machine. I love System Down. I like blunt tools of expression, and I like, you know. And so you hear, like in the newest album, you know, there's at least one song that I think has some things to say, and you can hear them, and it's in the language of metal as well, because I think that's powerful. But I mean, I feel like in American roots music, this is how I feel. I'm a big believer that, like, you define a culture by participating. You turn your back on something and walk away from it, take your hands out of the process, something that you don't like going down. And that may feel good in the sense you're like, oh, that's not me. But then you're kind of leaving it to the dogs a little bit, is how I feel. And I think that there are relevant cultural battlegrounds. I want to give you an example. In early thrash metal, the people who made early thrash metal were largely working class children of war vets. I don't want to say as a rule that's true, but I'd say a lot of the people who created early thrash metal were people whose parents were hippies and Vietnam War vets and both. And they were trying to create something different, something that was not la 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 daisy music. It was something harder and more hard truth. But there's this line that Dave Mustaine says in the Megadeth's great song, Hangar 18. Military intelligence, two words combined that can make sense. Now, I'm not saying everybody, I agree that everybody's not supposed to military, blah, blah. But it's an interesting moment to see. That was a moment when metal had political ambiguity. And even, and the bands back then would talk about things like war and the church and the government, and they would tell stories about the way things are, but speak with distaste. So there was a wide umbrella there where conservative and the liberal could each listen to some of the grim early stuff by Megadeth, Slayer, Metallica bands, and hear something that resonated. So, that was an early experience, kind of for me. I remember as listening to Pantera, I always loved the sound of it. I always thought that Dimebag Darrell was the most fun, bluesy, celebratory, laid back, note squeezing, vibrato happy, such a deep pocket player, so much. And what he brought into metal was something distinctly Southern blues. And if you look even for a moment, Southern blues and country culture come up against the deep background, of course, of very conservative Baptist Christian culture, church culture, which is inevitably stable, universally conservative culture. I also grew up in, rural New Hampshire, mostly. So I knew culturally what conservatives were very early on, way before I knew anything about politics. As a kid, I knew that, I had uncles from New York City who would, sometimes swear and, make a little bit of fun of the church. And I knew that there were, some taciturn folks from local New Hampshire who did not. And there was a difference,
Right.
The point is, I don't know. Yeah, I think that it's a more recent lie that has been foisted upon us that we're all really that different. And I'm not trying to be Mr. Cutting Edge with that notion. There's a lot of us out there that are saying, but they say you get more conservatives, But I find to myself, actually, what happens is I find more ambiguity and less of this young man's bullheaded, I know for sure, black and white, that this is this and that is that. I think it develops in me as I get older, And it's interesting to see. Well, I wonder, though, if I start to have moments where I have a conservative thought, I wonder, is that because I hung out with some conservatives playing these country gigs in the South? Well, here's the thing. It's people who vote conservative, they cover a huge part of the map. So let's say that what you do is you're a guy it's I want to play music in the Hudson Valley. Let's try to make it unpolitical. I want to play music in the Hudson Valley. Now, look, if I drive more than 3 hours, especially in the winter, chances are my expenses are, if I go 6 hours round trip or more, especially in the winter, chances are my expenses will outstrip what I can make on the average local gig. So what that means effectively is you have to play everywhere you can in a 2.5 hour radius. And what that means is you want to avoid people who have conservative political views. You have typically certain cultural liberal views,
Mm.
If I wanted to be it goes so deep. If I wanted to be sure that I don't play for anybody who votes Trump, what am I going to do? I'm only going to play in cities. I'm only going to play cities that I can reach within 2.5 hours. And then if I just can't find enough gigs, then what? I'm going to do something else for a living rather than stoop down to communicating with or entertaining people who vote different from. And getting back to that thing I said about, choose to wash your hands of something. There's you choose to not change it. It's kind of like, I feel like Dave Mustaine and Megadeth making that statement about the military. Meanwhile, there's plenty of other people in thrash who are making very conservative statements in metal. And modern metal especially is a pretty conservative, right?
Yeah.
So I encountered that other thing on, like, in the world of American roots, it's like, yeah, there's plenty of American roots music culture that is conservative, but also there's the music of the Virginia coal mines. There's the music of the band. There's the music of the young. There is a northern sound. I want to make this aside. May I jump into this for a second?
Yeah.
I believe there is a northern sound. It's harder to define, and there's been less of that love developed, I think, in a way. Because of the way industrial northern culture works, and less room for outdoor warm celebration. When they did, they made history. Woodstock, we finally did it. We got outside. We got outside and we're in a good mood. This is history.
Right. Totally. No, I think, I think you and I had the similar experience where, like, we kind of felt at one point we were kind of cannibalizing our own, like, fan base or something. And that, like, we'd go to a gig, we'd drive so many miles, right? We'd get there, we'd play, we'd make a whole bunch of new connections. People love our music, buy our shit. And then we'd come back home and then we'd post something like "fuck Trump" or, some political expression. And those same fucking people would be on your thread being like, well, I'm not listening to your shit anymore. And it's like, holy Christ.
So that's what, the best word I come up with for Jules. Thanks for bringing it there. Boundaries. That's the thing. Boundaries. Because look, if I go out and play a gig and somebody likes my music, well, I'm selling my business. That's a product. And I need to remember, even if I'm acting like a friend to them, even if they're acting like a friend to me, first off, I don't know who they are. I don't want them to be connected to me and anything I post online forever. This stranger that I met once, I don't want that in my life anymore. Pandemic taught me that. I don't want that. If I go play in some rural podunk town in the middle of nowhere and I meet one individual once, that's not a basis of a friendship. So if I'm like, oh yeah, let's just be friends on Facebook, two things happen. One, they get exposed to anything I do post online that's political in my personal world. And then also that's a missed opportunity to get them connected to my music. So basically, like, if someone wants to find my politics on my music site, they need to listen to my lyrics. Like on my, on my music Facebook, if they want to find my politics, they're going to have to get into my lyrics. I don't post any of my Trump stuff there. You know what I mean? But it does still happen in the real world, though, because when you hang out with people who go to gigs and other musicians in the Deep South, in various parts of the South, there are a lot of people there loving, valid players, people that have thoughts and emotions and everything, who are conservative, and some of them deeply so.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like, American Warriors music is all about common ground and reaching. And like, like if it comes to like playing covers, I don't mind playing covers as long as I love them. And I also don't mind singing words, including the words of others, as long as I don't disagree with them. So if I kind of I like liberty,
Sure.
I mean, if I like liberty, I like freedom of speech. Like somebody wants to like talk some shit on the federal government for whatever reason, like I'm cool with that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like in other words, I can fly some stuff that like hippies and rednecks would be like, all right, yeah, Because the American roots music dream, the Woodstock dream, the dream, in my mind, is that if you get together and you play some gospel-y, bluesy, country-ish, rootsy, old-timey, evoke your wagon wheel nostalgia type shit, do it, and you do it earnest. Everybody gets to show up to that party. Everybody should. No, a hippie doesn't get to turn their nose up at a soldier at a gig that I'm trying to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man.
Just like because I found when I play to only like liberal and especially only liberal money crowds, those are not my most satisfying gigs. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think
I also think they're not my most money. Those are not my most satisfying gigs, and they are rarely my most diverse gigs. When I play for super liberal money crowds, they are white as it goes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, when you go to the money, it's like, in other words, like there's this segregation and narrow-mindedness, and literal, actual racial segregation that you see when you go up the economic scale anywhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's baked in. So I guess what I'm saying is like in a working class life, in a working class life, as the life that I live as a consumer, but also in playing for working class folks and playing with other working class players, there is diversity. There's racial and economic and political diversity. And I feel like my message is really worth a lot if I'm not able to reach everybody. And that means what I'm talking about, but it's also how it sounds too. Like if I know I'm playing a Friday night gig at a honky tonk, people are there to have fun. Which means if I want to talk about my sad emotions or some shit, I need to do it like Hank Williams does, which is make it happy. I am devastated.
Yeah,
in other words, it's about courtesy in my mind. It's about courtesy and not being above the audience. That's why, to me, to answer your question, the political thing, it's rough.
Well, Michael, I think we're just about out of time at this point. I want to ask you before we let you go, where can people find you online? Where can people listen to your music?
So I'd like to send you right to where you can get my music online. Okay, go to MikeMcCarthySongs.bandcamp.com. Mike, and that's plural, SONGS. MikeMcCarthySongs.bandcamp.com. Got 3 albums up there. Look, I could send you to my website. I could send you to my Facebook, Michael Francis McCarthy, if you wish to interact with me on Facebook. But I just go listen to my music. Mike McCarthy Songs Bandcamp.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. Thank you, listeners, for listening to this episode of Working People. We will have this up on the Working People Patreon soon. The video for this will be on the Patreon for subscribers as well. In the meantime, MikeMcCarthySongs.bandcamp.com, and we'll leave you with, I don't know what song I'm going to choose of Michael's, but what you'll hear next is a song of Michael McCarthy's. Thanks, Working People listeners. See you later.
Thank you, dear toll booth collector, sentinel of the open road, for sharing good news while breathing them fumes, for directions and saying hello. Farewell, dear toll booth collector, nothing in this world stays the same. Call me old-fashioned, I know these things happen, but I'll miss you folks all just the same. $150 from Beacon to Woodstock, $5 from Jersey to Mass, $1.25 Bob in Worcester. Willie can tell you where to get gas. Inclement weather and traffic, closed roads and broken headlights. Thanks for the warning, for saying good morning. Good night, toll collector, good night.